Thank you so much, Ellen and crew. Don't go anywhere because they're going to be back in just a little bit here. I want to introduce our next speaker for you right now, and it's my pleasure. Had a chance to chat just briefly on Facebook with this young lady here this week as we led up to the event. Tori Serpa. Tori is the wife of Roy Serpa for the past 30 years. She's a mom to Blake, 24, who lives in Dallas, and Brittany, who would have been 22 last week. Tori is a retired flight attendant from Southwest Airlines for the past 30 years. Tori has passionately been working with schools, children, and community organizations that are committed to increasing the quality of life for children. She loves gardening, decorating, and making living spaces beautiful. And most importantly, she is a huge Ole Miss fan, I understand. Please, ladies and gentlemen, put your hands together for Mrs. Tori Serpa. Tori.
Hi, I want to thank you for having me here tonight. I was going to introduce you to my daughter. This is Brit Rose Serpa. My name is Tori Serpa. I'm here tonight to share with you my story of healing and purpose. I represent most modern women today. I'm a mom, a wife, a daughter, a friend to many from an upper middle class community in Dallas. I'm not a famous doctor or a celebrity, so why would I be included amongst this distinguished list of guests here tonight? Almost 4 years ago, my life was forever changed. On April 5th, 2012, my 18-year-old daughter, Brit Rose Serpa, committed suicide. She hung herself in her closet, and I was the one to find her. Finding my precious daughter hanging in her closet is something I cannot even begin to explain to you. There are just no words that can even begin to describe that moment. It was a moment of pure horror. Even though my heart remains broken and my life is forever changed, I want to share with you what I've learned from the front lines of the greatest battle of my life. The lessons haven't healed me completely, but they have given me the strength to move forward each day. Let me tell you the story about this beautiful girl. Brit Rose Serpa, Britt, or Rosie, as we affectionately called her, was so full of life. She was beautiful, young, happy, a social butterfly. She loved cheerleading and competitive gymnastics and shopping. And oh boy, could that girl shop. She had a passion for health and wellness and a love for people. She always entered the room singing Whitney Houston's song, "I Will Always Love You," at the top of her lungs. And I mean at the very top of her lungs. My husband used to tell her she was going to be an American Idol someday. Only problem was she really couldn't sing. And she knew that, but it didn't bother her. The thing is, nothing seemed to dampen the spirit of this young girl. Britt's love for people was very apparent. She had tons of friends. She was popular. She also had a lot of friends that didn't always fit in. When she saw someone being bullied or teased or left out, she rallied to their side by sitting with them at lunch, inviting them over to our house after school, or including them in social activities. When Britt was 12 years old, we noticed a drastic change in her behavior. We took her to numerous doctors and were given every diagnosis in the book. We sometimes questioned whether this drastic change in behavior was just typical pre-adolescent teenage girl stuff, or was this something bigger? We knew in our hearts that this was something bigger. At age 15, we enrolled Brittany in a therapeutic boarding school in Vermont in hopes that she could get help with her emotional struggles. She did very well at school, but then fell back into the same emotional struggles and behaviors when she returned back home to Dallas. In 2012, we took Brittany to the Cleveland Clinic to see Dr. Joseph Calabrese, a world-renowned psychiatrist, who diagnosed Brittany with bipolar disorder with rapid cycling. It all started to make sense. We finally had a name for this behavior and a doctor who could help us. While this gave us so much hope, we were still dealing with a very fragile girl who one week was on top of the world and the next week was sleeping her days away. In the spring of 2012, Brittany was ready to graduate from high school 1 year early to begin her college career at Ole Miss. She was over the moon about going to Ole Miss and was already making plans for sorority rush, roommates, and most importantly, being at the same college as her big brother Blake. What happened next was something as a mother I could not have ever fathomed. Brittany, my precious daughter, was the victim of online bullying. A complete stranger first contacted Brittany on Monday, and by Thursday she was gone. It's hard to understand how someone who appeared to have it all, beauty, a loving and supportive family, and lots of great friends, could be hurting so badly on the inside, yet look so happy on the outside. We never thought that this bubbly, outgoing, happy-go-lucky, beautiful girl would take her own life. It just never even crossed our minds. After losing Brittany, I had two choices. One was I could curl up in a ball and never get out of bed and let the pain destroy me. Or two, not let her story become the story of another family. That's why I'm here today. Somehow, God gave me the grace to plunge forward, even though I didn't know how I would ever get the strength to do so. I dove in head first, and I tried to continue my life as normal. I became obsessed with reading everything I could get my hands on related to online bullying, mental illness, and especially bipolar disorder. I continued working on remodeling the SIGAP house at Ole Miss and hosting SIGAP Parents Weekends just 2 weeks after Brittany's passing. It's interesting, though, how people expect you to behave when this type of tragedy happens. Unfortunately, I heard whispers from some of my friends that I was not acting like a grieving mother who had just lost a child. You know, it's all I knew how to do, plain and simple. There's no manual on how a parent should act after losing a child. I just put one foot in front of the other, day by day. Then it became a week, then a month, and then a year. Looking back, I wondered how I was able to move through it, how I was able to cope with such a tragedy, how I was able to live with what appeared from the outside to be a normal life. The answer was only by the grace of God. After we lost our precious daughter, a fire started to grow inside of me. I was tired of reading the newspapers and listening to the news to learn yet another bright, beautiful young child had ended their life. Whether it was because of online bullying or the failure of our public policy and our current healthcare system to recognize and address necessary services needed to support those with mental illness or those being bullied. In our country, 40,000 women a year are lost to breast cancer, while over 30,000 people a year die from suicide. Breast cancer remains front and center on our healthcare radar. Why are we not talking more about suicide and mental illness? I have always wondered what my purpose was here in life. I have always had a passion for working with communities, volunteering, and schools, trying to make life better for our children. I would have never dreamed in 100 years that I would become a voice and an advocate for suicide prevention, anti-bullying, and mental health awareness. Let's talk a moment about bullying. I'm puzzled by this behavior and the permissive nature of it today. It's seen as just everyday adolescent behavior. It's sort of like, oh, kids will be kids. The damage that is done to the victims is often overlooked and minimized, and yet can last a lifetime. Bullying is not the same as it was 30 years ago. It was damaging then, but today even more so. With the advances of technology like Facebook, Snapchat, Instagram, and Twitter, it's taken on a new form that strips away any accountability of the perpetrator. It's no longer a face-to-face violence, but now constant, indirect violence that occurs 24 hours a day, leaving our children vulnerable and helpless to fight back. The increase in suicides from bullying over the last few years has prompted communities and schools to take a proactive role in prevention campaigns to educate our children and parents about this harmful behavior. While this is a start, it's simply not enough. Did you know that only a handful of states have laws against bullying that punish the perpetrator with a fine and jail time of only, at most, 5 months? This has to be a collective responsibility of an entire community and country. Just like recreational teen substance abuse and drinking and driving, it takes an entire community to address this problem. So what is my purpose here today? I want to rally a movement similar to Mothers Against Drunk Drivers that increases accountability for bullying behavior. Yes, accountability. I believe that the bullies are continuing to do these behaviors because we have no accountability for their actions. I believe prevention, coupled with the appropriate consequences for bullying behavior, will change the face of suicide in our country. Let me share some information with you about suicide. Suicide is believed to be a reaction to overwhelming feelings of loneliness, worthlessness, helplessness, and depression. It usually occurs when a person's pain exceeds his or her resources and ability to cope. Research has shown a strong link between suicide and mental illness and substance abuse. In fact, 90% of the people that take their own life had a pre-existing mental illness or substance abuse problem at the time of their death. The number one cause of suicide is untreated depression. Yet everyone who dies by suicide is not mentally ill or depressed. The good news is this is treatable. Approximately 30,000 people a year die by suicide in the United States. Approximately 750,000 attempt suicide each year in the U.S. Suicide is the third leading cause of death in 10 to 14-year-olds. Yes, you heard that right, 10 to 14-year-olds, 15 to 24-year-olds, and the second leading cause of death in 25 to 34-year-olds. More people die by suicide in the U.S. than by homicide and auto accidents. I would also like to share some common misconceptions about suicide. Are people that die by suicide weak? Nope, quite the contrary. Most people who die by suicide are very, very strong, successful people. People who talk about suicide won't really do it. Nope, wrong again. Almost everyone who commits suicide or attempts suicide has given some clue or warning. I strongly encourage you not to ignore suicide threats. Anyone who tries to kill themselves must be crazy. No, that's not true either. They may be upset, they may be grief-stricken, depressed, or feeling hopeless. Suicide seems like the only solution in stopping the pain. If a person is determined to kill themselves, nothing is going to stop them. Nope, not true. Even the most severely depressed people have mixed feelings about death, and most waver until the last moment between wanting to live and wanting to end their pain. Most suicidal people do not want to die, they just want the pain to stop. Talking about suicide may give someone the idea. No, not true. Don't be afraid to talk about it. Your concern in openly talking about suicide doesn't plant ideas. Sometimes the signs are not real obvious. In Brittany's case, there were hardly any signs. Granted, she slept a lot. She didn't want to go to school because she was so tired. Sometimes on the weekends, she opted just to stay home and watch movies instead of going out with her girlfriends. Yeah, these things did strike us as odd at the time, but we never thought that she would take her own life. We didn't even consider that she was at risk. In hindsight, these were signs that she needed help. You know, we all see stories in the news, at school, even in our neighborhoods. The boy down the street who was always so happy with a smile on his face, he's gone. The girl who loved God, who had so many friends, nobody knew, felt so alone, she's gone. Our generation is falling victim to a silent killer, suicide. People are hiding it, tucking it away, or ignoring it, hoping it would go away. Well, it doesn't ever go away. The families don't stop grieving. The friends don't ever stop wondering, what could they have done to help? And questions never end. That's why it's time to bring suicide to the front lines and ask ourselves, ask our generation, why our friends, our brothers and sisters think suicide is the way out. Our generation is consumed with normal. We hide away the depression, the anxiety, the hurt, because God forbid, that's not normal. We aren't perfect. We live in a society these days that thrives on looking perfect. Who says hurting isn't normal? Hurting is normal. Anxiety occasionally is normal. Feeling sad is normal. It's up to you, it's up to me, and it's up to all of us to change this. The girl who doesn't eat lunch or dinner anymore, idolizes Khloe Kardashian, was called fat yesterday at school and promised herself no one would ever do that again. The boy who thinks Pokemon is cool, eats lunch alone, was told, just go kill yourself because no one will miss you. Yesterday at the park, he listened. It's up to you, it's up to me, and it's up to all of us to change this. The boy who smiles every day, who is the class clown, goes home to an empty house, an empty life, decides tomorrow will be his last day he breathes. It's up to you, it's up to me, and it's up to all of us to change this. Our generation needs to stop thinking it's okay to judge and to stop thinking words don't hurt, because they do. Let's talk about the stigma According to the World Health Organization, mental illness represents the biggest economic burden of any health issue in the world. Yet shockingly, 450 million people worldwide do not get any treatment. One thing many Americans can agree on is that our healthcare system is broken. In many parts of our country, mental health treatment, resources, and support are not available until a crisis occurs. In some communities, jails and prisons have become the default place for mental health treatment. Today, we hear so frequently about people going into schools and shooting young children, or a movie theater, or a shopping mall. We are sadly becoming numb to the constant flood of the news headlines. The facts make one thing clear: mental illness is a major public health crisis in the United States today. However, changes to our mental health system can help the situation. As a country, we hold negative attitudes and stereotypes about people with mental illness. The stigma and the misunderstandings about mental illness prevent families from facing the problem and seeking help. Mental illness doesn't just affect the person, it affects the entire family. It can change if we start to speak up. We can end the stigma. If together we begin to discuss the subject of mental illness, depression, and suicide openly like we do any other disease. I know firsthand how painful it is to have a family member with mental illness. The reality is, though, that it's treatable if we take the first step and speak up. Step up when you see someone struggling. Speak up and let them know you're concerned about them. And help them start the process of getting treatment. This is treatable. Suicide is preventable. 30 years ago, women didn't discuss that they had breast cancer. It was taboo. But thankfully, the stigma is gone now, and women feel comfortable talking about it. We can do the same thing with suicide and mental illness. We as a community, as a country, need to get to that point with mental illness, that it's something we talk about without being ashamed or embarrassed. So many people struggle with depression, anxiety, eating disorders, and many other mental illnesses, but hide the pain for fear of being embarrassed. I bet if I asked y'all to raise your hands if you have ever had issues with anxiety or depression, you would be shocked at the amount of people that put their hand up. So why are we not talking about it? We need to end the stigma and start a conversation with those we fear are struggling. A big part of the problem in dealing with mental illness is our public health system. They're hard to navigate, they're underfunded. Private mental health care services may be too expensive due to out-of-pocket costs and lack of providers in a network. If you are not a family of means, likely you would not be able to afford the proper treatment and care that you need. To me, this is just unacceptable. Our children deserve better. So what can be done? We need to change the way we think about mental illness. We must increase awareness and reduce the stigma and the shame associated with it. We must break down these walls because when we do, we allow the people who are suffering in silence to reach out for help. Sadly, too often, the stigma around mental illness prevents people who need help from seeking it. But that simply doesn't make any sense. Whether an illness affects your heart, your arm, your ear, or your brain, it's still an illness. There shouldn't be any distinctions. We don't consider taking medication for an ear infection something to be ashamed of. We shouldn't treat mental health conditions any different. Instead, we should make it clear that getting help isn't a sign of weakness, it's a sign of strength. And we should ensure that people can get the treatment that they need. Recent legislation holds promise that people with mental illness can receive treatment comparable with those with health issues. But is that enough? Are these new policies really going to make a difference? We were a family with means. We were able to go to any doctor in the country. Yet it took 6 years to get a proper diagnosis for Brittany. The average is 10 years. That's just not acceptable. I believe we can do better for our children. There's a perception in our country that people with mental illness or who have committed suicide are weak. That's simply not true. Rather, people who have died by suicide or suffer from mental illness are strong, very successful people. Being successful and having a mental illness or having suicidal thoughts are not contradictory statements. What do Winston Churchill, Terry Bradshaw, Robin Williams, Ted Turner, Steve Jobs, Abraham Lincoln, Bill Gates, and Princess Diana all have in common? They all suffer or have suffered from mental health issues, yet have achieved brilliant and unbelievable things. One reason people don't reach out is because of the stigma. They are afraid to be perceived as trouble or weak to those around them. We have to talk about it. We have to normalize it. The more we talk about mental illness as a brain disease, the easier it will be for us to accept and help those needing treatment. My wish is to someday hear people share with friends and family their struggles with mental illness, as they do about cancers, diabetes, and heart disease. We can reduce the rate of suicides if we address the stigma and the shame associated with it. Suicides are increasing because people are afraid for help, and they're afraid of not feeling comfortable speaking about their struggles. We can't let them suffer in silence anymore. My biggest takeaway message for you tonight is that people who have mental illness or who are depressed or suicidal don't always look like it on the outside. My Britt, this girl, was a beautiful, bubbly, outgoing young girl. She didn't look like the girl who was struggling. Don't let fear prevent you from asking tough questions to those you love. Don't let the stigma prevent you from helping someone who may be struggling. As a community, we have to start speaking up and standing up and helping those we feel are struggling. In my case, many of Brittany's friends thought that her text messages seemed a little strange the days leading up to her suicide, but they never told me. If I had known, I might have been able to prevent it. But hindsight is 20/20. I have been uncomfortably numb since April 5th, 2012. It has taken me 4 years, but I feel the fog lifting and the numbness is subsiding a bit. My heart is still broken, and I still carry a huge sadness and emptiness that may never go away. But through this tragedy, the Brit Rose Foundation and an online clothing boutique, shopbritrose.com, were born. The funds raised will build awareness and support for prevention, intervention, treatment, and recovery for families struggling with bullying, suicide, and mental illness. My hope is that soon, as a society, we will have more understanding, compassion, and awareness for those struggling with mental illness, especially young children. I want my story and Britt's legacy to be a message of hope, help, and peace of mind for other mothers, fathers, brothers, and sisters. Thank you very much for letting me share my very personal story with y'all.
Thank you so much, Tori. Thank you for that.